Hi, everybody.
Hi.
How's everybody doing tonight? Good. I have to just sort of clean this. Welcome everyone to the November Central Oregon Writers Guild monthly meeting. Thanks for coming out in this freezing cold weather. It's great to see you all. We have several new faces here tonight. Would you new folks stand up? I know Ted is new, Jake is new, Charlene. Stand up and wave. Other new people who are here for the first time. This is great. This is the pre-winter I'm gonna write that damn novel thing. Yeah, it's time. It's finally time. I'm gonna write the damn thing. So the point of this whole, the reason we get together is because we're cool people. And cool people should hang out together. But the idea of being together in the same room or in the same organization is that we buoy each other, right? The rising tide floats all boats. We're here to help each other, inspire each other. Writing is a very solitary act. I think even when you're collaborating, it's a very solitary act. And to have other people around that we can talk to about writing, that can inspire us about writing, that help us get our butts in chairs in front of a piece of paper or a laptop or a computer or whatever it is. I think that's, I don't know, it's our art. Does that make sense? And I think that we use art to connect to the universe. And when we're able to do that, I think we feel good. We understand more about ourselves. We understand more about each other. We understand more about the universe. We're able to communicate that thing that's inside of us that we need to get out. And it's hard to do it because I was going to say it doesn't pay. But it's not your job, you know? I mean, that's the thing, right? I do my job because if I don't do my job, I won't have a job and then I won't have food, right? But the act of writing, the actual act of writing, not the to have written, but the actual act of writing is an amazing thing to happen in our minds, right? It's an amazing way to be in touch and to be present. And so we're here to support each other. And we're also here, you know, a lot of people ask me, in fact, people were just asking me this past week, we've talked about critique groups. How do I get a writing group? How do I get a writing group? This is how you get a writing group. I'm not going to pair you up. You're going to pair yourselves up, right? So when we're done with this, we have cookies and coffee and a place to be, and we have little name tags that say our names and what we write. And it really doesn't matter what we write. We just talk to each other, and once we find people who are sort of like-minded, we say, hey, do you want to get together and have a cup of coffee and talk about writing? And that's how critique groups form. I have forced critique groups, and I've been in forced critique groups, and those don't work, right? You got to sort of like the people that you're, or I don't know, you have to have the same goals, I think. And all critique groups have different goals. And I was saying this to somebody the other day. You can have the let's go over to our house and eat cheese and drink wine and vaguely talk about writing and get drunk and full, or we can do, we're going to publish this damn thing and we're going to critique chapter by chapter or whatever. Right? So there's a big span in all of that. So anyway, this is community. Community is the thing that helps support us in this very solitary part. So thank you for coming, and thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting each other. I'm going to go through our little events thing. We're going to have a featured reader, and then we have a presenter tonight. That's how this works, right? So, and hello to everybody at home too. So this is our web page, and this is the landing page of our web page. meetings and events. This little thing right here, all three of our anthologies are available, including the brand new one that many of you are in. And you can click on that Amazon thing or go to Roundabout. We do have a release coming up. If you look over here on December 10th, right?
Yeah.
No, 5th, shit, sorry. 5th, that's like, where is it? So that's at Roundabout. They want us to register if you're going to be there because they have limited seating. When you register, buy a book, and you can avoid the cover charge or whatever it is. And that's going to be at 6:30 on December 5th. And Denise is in charge of that. We've got readers, we've got books, so we'll have books for sale for those of you who are for everyone. So that's the anthology. Over on the left side are all the events we have, and so as the year is waning out, we only go through December. Heads up, the Central Oregon Writers Guild meetings are always on the second Tuesday, except in December. This year, it's going to be on Monday night. So heads up that it's going to be Monday night. This is our holiday potluck and reading. So we're going to have readers, bring food. We'll have foods, and so we'll be in this room. We'll eat. We'll have fun. We'll chat. We'll meet people. We'll get inspired. This is a great opportunity to meet with your fellow writers. The right side of this shows events that we know of that are going on in Central Oregon, writing related events. Okay. I just talked to Barber Library. They're going to start doing a write-in, so a quiet writing thing at Barber Library at COCC, and this is absolutely open to the public. 12:30 to 2 on Tuesdays. Okay, so just go there. They're going to run it kind of like Shut Up and Write. A little bit of chatting at the beginning, quiet writing time, and a little bit of chatting. Okay, and then Shut Up and Write is still on Wednesdays at Step Off. So another, that if you're sitting at home and you sit down in front of the computer and you're going to write the great American novel and you remember that you need to do the dishes, that won't happen when you're in these groups, right? You're gonna be forced to write. You might answer your emails for an hour, but okay. Then the other stuff we've got going. We've got Irene tonight. We have Karina Castlebaum is doing her poetry play shops. We've got some author readings. We've got our Blank Pages writing salon. That happens the third Saturday of every month. It's online. Click on that. Show up. We do a prompt. We send out a prompt. The prompt for this month is November. Really creative prompt. And you write a page and a half of stuff. We read it. We say that's fantastic, and then we go to the next person, right? So you get some chance to read online. And if you don't want to read, just show up and listen. What else? There's poetry night that same night at Lone Pine Coffee. Craig Johnson, author of The Longmire. Longmire? Yeah, he's in Sun River. He shows up in Sun River as well. So if you love cowboy writing, go down to Sun River Boats and see him. Spoken word night, third Thursday in Bend at the Commons and in Redmond at the High Desert Music Hall. Things kind of thin out at the end of the month because of the holidays and everything, but Paulina Springs has a poetry night, monthly poetry gathering on the 2nd. Again, the book release. Lori Hellis, who swore she was coming tonight, isn't here, is also doing a reading at Paulina Springs. So if you're going to be in Sisters and don't want to come down to the anthology thing, go see Lori. Danny Nichols is doing a workshop up at COCC if you're writing for kids. Irene and Ben, wave your arm, run the Raging Writers Spoken Words. That's the third Sunday, right? Second Sunday, sorry. Second Sunday, and that's at Sport. And that's generative writing and open mic. Our holiday reading, another poetry play shop with Karina, another more authors the third Thursdays, and whatever else is going on there. Sarah Sear, does a online writing group. That's gonna start in January. Sarah does some really great generative stuff. So if you want to get inspired and do some writing, check out that link at the bottom there. That's all I know of. We're putting together our lineup for next year. If you have ideas of what you'd like to see or know of someone who you would like to have as a presenter, please come talk to me or email us at centraloregonwritersguild@gmail.com. Okay. If you have a friend or someone who has inspired you, please let us know, because we're going to put together our lineup for next year. We'll have 11 presenters next year, and then again our potluck. So please give me some input, or else I'm gonna have to do it myself, and I'm just gonna do stuff I like. So that's all I know. Anybody have any amazing news or announcements that they want to share?
I entered a contest and I did not make it past the first round.
Nice.
But I contacted the people and I said, well, it says there's supposed to be notes on my manuscript. There's no notes. It's not very helpful. And they said, well, did you turn on track changes? So if you ever enter a contest and there's supposed to be comments, make sure you turn on track changes before you contact them.
Before you call them and before you tell them that they're a bunch of, you didn't do your job. Yeah. Were they useful?
Yeah.
Good. A lot of contests and submissions, you can pay an extra fee to get some feedback. Something, if you're interested in doing, can be useful, right? Other cool stuff, anybody? I got a rejection this week. Yeah, it's always like, do I want to open this? All right. So our featured reader coordinator is Mary Krakow, and Mary is going to introduce our featured reader tonight.
But before I do, I want to remind you all that next month is our potluck, and we have our readers read. So there's 10 slots for reading, and I only have 3 people signed up. So I'm going to send this around, and hopefully, you know, you'll fill it in, and we just ask that you read for 5 minutes at the holiday potluck, and I'm just going to pass this around.
If you're on the fence on this, just do it.
Don't
be on the fence.
And if you have a piece in the anthology, we know you've got something to read. All right, while that's going around, I'm going to introduce tonight's featured reader. Amanda Curley, pen name Amanda Rose, is a local author born and raised in Central Oregon. Raised on authors such as Tamora Pierce, Christopher Paolini, and Brian Davis, she has a love for young adult fantasy, science fiction, action-adventure, and even a little bit of romance. She grew up telling stories just to entertain herself, and now tells stories to entertain those around her. Amanda has been a member of the Central Oregon Writers Guild since 2011, and tied for 4th place in the 2014 contest anthology. She enjoys gardening, reading, of course, and can be found dancing West Coast swing most Fridays. Please welcome Amanda Curley.
Thank you, Mary. Okay. Can y'all hear me okay? Testing, a little better? Okay, all right. The car jerked like a fucking bronco from hell. I gripped the wheel with white-knuckled fingers as sweat dripped down my face. My stomach churned as my fingers slid over the slick gray leather. Clutch! Instructor Barron shrieked as he slammed back into his seat. Hit the clutch! The little car shuddered as it lurched through the school's empty back lot. I fumbled for the clutch before we died of whiplash. My sneaker bumped one of the pedals and I slammed my foot down, hoping it was the right one. The momentum of the brake whipped me into the seatbelt's sudden jolting grip, then back in the seat as the tires screeched to a halt against the pavement. For a brief moment, everything went silent, the quiet absorbing everything in its wake. Engine dead, the car seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. Mr. Barron let out a breath too, then reached up and readjusted his glasses, which had jumped off the bridge of his nose and were sitting askew on his face. Well, that wasn't so bad, the teacher said unconvincingly. I didn't dare speak, afraid I might puke all over the dashboard. Okay, Miss Hall, let's try again. Turn the key and start the engine. You're doing just fine. I shook my head. I can't. Mr. Barron frowned. Yes, you can. Take a deep breath and focus. I did as I was told, if only to quell the queasiness in my stomach. Now turn the key, he instructed. Easy for you to say, I thought. But I took a deep breath and concentrated anyway. I imagined pressing the clutch down and reaching up to turn the engine over, then pulling forward without the insane jackhammering. I grasped the key and cleared my mind to focus. I closed my eyes and visualized the car going forward smoothly. A warm tingling spread from my core down into my fingertips. I drew in a shaky breath. I didn't realize the car was moving until Mr. Barron said, "There you go, that's it." I opened my eyes. We were moving, and smoothly. Only I hadn't touched any of the pedals. I hadn't even put it in gear. The tingling in my fingers grew into a hot prickle. A sudden caustic nausea pooled in my gut. A fine sheen of sweat broke out across my skin. The windows were rolled up, but the clunker had a manual window crank. If I reached for it, I would lose focus and end up jacksawing again. Now give a little more gas, Mr. Barron urged. I pressed the gas pedal down. Static shocks erupted in the dash, and something popped under the hood. Sparks shot out of the ancient radio. "What did you do?" Mr. Barron shouted. "Nothing." I shielded my face. "I don't know." The car shot forward. "Brake!" Mr. Barron howled. "Brake!" I ripped my foot from the gas pedal and slammed on the brake, but the car refused to respond. It seemed possessed. "It's stuck!" I looked up and screamed. In the middle of the road, staring evenly back at me, sat a huge black wolf. We were barreling straight towards it. I grabbed the wheel and yanked to the side. The car flew by, everything blurring as rubber skidded over pavement. The tires screeching an ungodly squeal. I tried to straighten the car, but it was already too late. We bumped up over the sidewalk and tore over green lawn. In the seat next to me, Mr. Barron shrieked as the school rose up before us. The hood slammed into the brick. The seatbelt seized up and the airbags exploded like a fist to the face. A wheezing stillness finally descended on the car. Steam rose from under the crumpled hood. Somewhere nearby, voices called out. Everything spun. My head hurt. The heat and the itching slowly faded. At least the car wasn't moving anymore. "Miss Haw, are you all right?" Mr. Barron asked, leaning over me. Before I could reply, I leaned out the broken driver's side window and emptied my lunch all down the side of it. Finished, I slumped in my seat, spent and a little lightheaded. Swiping a lock of wispy black hair out of my eyes, I wheezed, "Did I pass?"
Nice job, Amanda. Excellent attention, and I love your descriptions in there, and a very good read. Lovely reading. Our presenter this evening is my beautiful wife, Irene Cooper. Irene's writings appear in the Beloit Poetry, Denver Quarterly, the Rumpus, Witness, and elsewhere. She wrote the feminist noir novel Found, which won the North Street Prize. Committal, a poet-friendly spy-fi about family. Spare Change, which is finalist for the Stafford Hall Award for Poetry. And her recent publication is Even My Dreams Are Over the Constant State of Anxiety. And these are available for sale on the back. table, check in with Irene if you would like to buy one. She's, these are through Irene Press, where she's an editor. She teaches at OSU Cascades. She teaches at COCC too. She's a founder of the Forge Writing Program. She facilitates creative opportunities in community, currently serves as an editor for Early Press. She lives in Middle Oregon. She is a excellent cook, certified chef.
Or as you remember.
Yeah. She is an amazing partner and mother, and she knits too. So let's welcome Irene Cooper.
Hi, everybody. Lots of familiar faces and new faces. It's delightful to stand up here. Amanda, that was an amazing reading. It's almost exactly frame for frame, like my driver's test when I was 30 years old. Right down to the end. Poetry works. That's what we're here to talk about tonight. So one of the concepts that I stump for is that poetry, more than anything else, is well, it's an essential for me on a lot of levels, but specific to our purpose here tonight, it's an excellent tool for thinking about all of our writing. And I think that frequently, especially the way that a lot of us learn it in high school and growing up, not so much when we're little, because I think we get exposed to some really good stuff when we're little. But the concepts that it is somehow lofty, unreachable, elitist, when most of us write it when we're teenagers, a lot of us wrote it when we were kids, a lot of us write it now and don't tell anybody. But the idea that, you know, the big P, it's really, in my life, it's really a tool. I identify as a writer, but I would say that, you know, poetry brings me back into focus. Both the reading of it, which is a great pleasure, and in the revision of it. So I will say that even the generation of poetry is not where the magic lies for me. It's in the revision. So the idea that hits the page is the start of things, certainly. But this idea of, you know, the real elements of poetry that make it the magic that it is, this idea of concision, this idea of dynamic language. I know when I have my fiction brain at work or when I'm writing an essay, particularly in fiction though, I almost always have the big story or the big idea in play. And I almost always write through the details, meaning write over or circumvent a lot of the mood building and character building details that I need to have in it ultimately in the first draft. Because I am thinking of building this structure, having this construction. But when I go back to revise, I'm thinking on the sentence level, I'm thinking on the word level, I'm thinking frequently on the syllable level, the sound and the music, and the things that are inherent in my intention that the reader may not identify specifically, but they're going to get it, you know. They're going to understand my intention, whether or not it's fully spelled out for them or not. Because it's happening on the sentence level, it's happening in the music, it's happening in the dynamism of the prose. So, hence the pun there, poetry works. And is this my clicker? Thank you. I would like to also note the smoothness of the Becca whoosh in when we lost the screen there. That was very professional. Well, this is a little light, I suppose, but yeah, thank you. I'll rethink my white writing. So one of the core tenets in poetry, even in narrative poetry, is the idea of metaphor. And can I pick this up?
Yeah.
Need to move. So the idea of enriching our writing is one thing, but even enrichment is not necessarily, you know, we used to have a culinary teacher back in school, and Michael and I are in culinary school, and he would talk about white bread, and he would say, you know, you take out everything, you take out the grain, if you take out the hull, if you take out the vitamins, and you add back in some, some vitamin D or some calcium, do you feel enriched? So I feel like enrichment is not an additive. It's building from the inside out. So Mark Doty, some of you may be familiar with Mark Doty. He's a great poet, he's been around a while. In The Art of Description, offers a bit of insight into why metaphor is important to poetry and writing in general. So metaphor introduces tension and polarity to language. This is so essential, this idea. So polarity is a word that Mark Doty uses. I frequently use the word binary, even though binary sits in the hot seat etymologically right now. But in terms of writing, this idea of things pulling on each other to form tension. They don't really have to be polar or opposites, but language is going to pull on in various degrees of tension, because we don't always want the tightest of tension, right? So metaphor introduces tension and polarity to language. And what is the tension of metaphor? It's introducing an image for something that is possibly more concrete than that. If I am going to say, my love is like the sun, which, he is. It's this idea of extraction, of decentering the idea of my love is introducing some sort of surprise on the end of that. So this is the idea of tension and polarity. Metaphor allows us to create some distance, speak more freely about sensitive subjects, for example, sex or shame or grief. And in this way, we can come through the side door rather than enter the front door. We can come through an attic window, we can come down the chimney, we can bury under the house and come up through the kitchen drain. But we don't necessarily have to barge through the front door of our most tender, plaintive things. We can handle it with a little bit of distance. And metaphor is an act of inquiry, not an expression of what we already know. So I'm not here to creatively write and have you be resting in all your assurances of how you view the world. I want you to recognize the familiar in something you've never read before. I want you to recognize something you didn't know you knew. This is the idea of, and recognition is not solution. Recognition is not putting a big old bow on it. It's opening the question a little wider. It's making the ideas in our hearts and our brains bigger. No less than that. Okay, so Joy Hargrove was our National Poet Laureate for a number of years. Lucky us. Is a poet and a musician and an activist and an all-around great person. And this is a poem that I do come back to around this time of year, poem of gratitude. I like the fact that it's all of these lines that are sort of spaced out in double spacing or 1.5. They're each little expressions. But the thing that I want to point out in this poem before we read it is, like for me, there is a recognizable and driving metaphor holding this poem together. There's an image that it circles around. And then each line is going to be introducing an abstract idea in exquisite detail. And the next slide will demonstrate a little bit more of what I mean by that, but we'll just read it. Perhaps the world ends here, by Joy Hargrove. The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens or dogs away from it. Baby's teeth at the corners, they scrape their knees under it. It is here that children are given instructions on what it means to be human. We make men at it, we make women. At this table, we gossip, recall enemies, and the ghosts of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh with us at our poor, falling down selves. And as we put ourselves back together again at the table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. We've given birth on this table, and we have prepared our parents for burial here. At this table, we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse, we give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite. So to just pick the first line, and I have my own suggestions on the next slide, which are only my own suggestions, and I can change my mind at any minute. What is the abstraction or big idea? On the very first line, the world begins at a kitchen table, no matter what, we must eat to live. What large idea is being communicated on that line? There's no one right answer.
It happens around the kitchen table.
It does. And what specifically does we must eat to live point to?
Nourished.
Nourished? Certainly. Certainly, nourished is a great word. Love it. What about the table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun? And I love the fact that this is almost a cliche, but it isn't, because it's just different enough to be surprising. What is a house in the rain and an umbrella in the sun if you're going to attach an abstraction or a large idea to that? Shelter. Exactly right. And each one of those is getting at something. So these were my thoughts on this, and I have changed my mind several times actually since I put it up. But this is the operation of a single metaphor doing the work of conveying a number of ideas. And in a poem, you can do this on every line. If you are attentive to form, if you are attentive, well, particularly to form, and this is a very specific form, it looks so simple, but it's one line, it's one phrase, well, more or less one phrase per line, it's spaced so that you read each one individually and you stop in between. Most prose will not look like this. But we can still take a measure from it. So if we say, I love nourished at the top, and I landed on survival, but either one of these is going to work. It's the big idea. And so on and so forth. We chase chickens and dog away from it. This is the quotidian. This is the everyday. This is that the table is the stuff of our everyday lives. It is the most normal, basic thing we don't even have to think. It is here that children are given instructions, and now we're talking about lineage. Now we're talking about one generation into the next. A very big idea. But we can see it. We can see it in this idea of children given instructions. You can see homework at the table. You can see someone being told how to set the table, or clear a dish, or just how to be in collectivity at the table. I love that at this table we gossip, we're called enemies and ghosts of lovers. I'm actually thinking the ghosts of lovers aren't actually dead people, they're just ghosts of lovers. Is the mischief, is the fun of that. Our poor falling down selves. This is the place where we cannot be anybody but ourselves. We're not at the dining room table. We're not at the banquet hall. We're at the kitchen table. And then of course, and so on and so forth until we get to the last, which is the last line in a poem is an important line. And this idea of where does it take us? And it doesn't answer anything. Perhaps it already starts with something indefinite. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite. This insistence on joy that is not flippant. That is not, it's not an unawareness of the world ending, but it is an insistence on eating of the last sweet bite. All right, thank you, Joy. Abstract. By the way, this week was very dark and gray, so, you'll forgive the Miami nature of these slides, but normally I'm not quite this colorful. So, papers and pens, everyone, it's time to do something. A great place to start with figurative language is a word bank. So we're going to come back to this idea of abstractions. And here's a little mini list. It actually doesn't have one of my favorite abstractions on it, which is boredom. I love to work with the word boredom. But these are the things we're talking about. Love, of course, enormous abstraction, but also any of these others: trust, happiness, depression. My favorite bumper sticker, by the way. Depression is anger without the enthusiasm. It will remain my favorite bumper sticker forever. So these things that sometimes in our writing we'll reach for, because this is what we want to say. We want to communicate the big idea. The problem with using the abstraction, the word itself, to communicate the big idea, and it's not that you never can, but the problem is it's too big. It doesn't communicate the specificity that is in your intention, in your writer brain, in your writer heart, about what it means, which is what people are reading for. They're wanting to know your intent, your take on joy, not generic joy. So pick one. Don't think about it too much. Okay. So this is a 3-part exercise, and we'll take our time with it. Feel free to ask me any questions while we're in the middle of it. But the idea is to select a word, and we're just going to start with concrete nouns that relate to the 5 senses, which are outlined here as sight, smell, touch, taste, sound. And we want concrete nouns at this point. We'll talk about verbs in a minute, but now we want nouns. And the idea is to let your brain drift. So ultimately, when we come to the 3rd stage of this exercise, it will be this was when it doesn't feel like, or it doesn't taste like. We won't use that language when we get to the 3rd stage of this exercise. But let's not worry about that right now. All we want to do is take our abstraction and write at least 2 concrete nouns for each sense. So 2 words for what boredom looks like, 2 words for what it smells like, etc., etc. You can write more if you want, but that'll give us a running start at the rest of this exercise. And as you can see by the examples, it's only going to make sense to you. This part isn't about communicating your intention. This part is about finding what is uniquely your view on this. So, for writer number 1, who chose joy, sight is the color yellow and a smile. Pretty universal, but still. Smell, this is where it gets weird, is coconut and lemon. Very specific. Taste is lemon and peach. Touch, tingle, kitten fur. Sound is giggle and lapping water. Very specific to writer number 1. Writer number 2 chose trust. Sight is the look of a passenger seat. Now I'm thinking about your mini. The smell of dough, holding hands for touch, coffee and milk for taste, and the sound of the dog snoring is how this person envisions sensorially trust. So let's make our little list. We'll just take about 3 minutes or so. Don't overthink it.
Is it to pick any word, or you want us to write on boredom?
No, any of those words. I shall go back and we shall look at that list. And if you have another one you like better, go with that. Take about 1 more minute for this part. Okay, now whether or not you completed your list, no worries. So the next stage is to build up the phrasing a little bit. We're gonna ease our way into the verbs. But the idea is you're going to, following that example of trust there, you're gonna take your abstraction and you're going to make larger images of it. So the example is trust sits calmly in the passenger seat. Trust expands like yeasted dough. Trust is your damp calm in mind. Trust is a brew of fresh coffee with a splash of almond milk. Trust snores like a dog at the foot of the bed. We're not worrying too much about the verbs right now. We'll talk more about those in a minute. As you can see, I broke one of the great June Jordan's how to write a poem or how to recognize a good poem by using not one, but two iterations of thinking, of the conjugation of to be. We do like to avoid conjugations of to be, like the plague. Oh, I'm just not gonna be able to hold on to that. Clearly, this is not meant for that. But at the moment, we're not gonna worry too much about that. So have your abstraction. If you need to use the word is or are, go right ahead and do it. But let's make broader phrases from these concrete nouns. Let's add a verb. Let's make a little picture. Okay, enough, wherever you are with that. No, I have no luck. I want to talk a little bit about the why of it all. When you write, you don't think, even the first time you write, you're writing the first draft, you have an idea. You're not thinking necessarily, most of us are not thinking on the sentence level. We're not thinking that we have to have this balance of tension, these polarities, and, you know, the use of metaphor, or even sort of emotional arc, or any of these other things. We're not thinking about that. We're just doing the thing we're compelled to do, just try to tell a story. This is all about revision, but it's also about training your brain to sometimes not go for the easy reach. Or if you have gone for the easy reach in drafts because you just want to get the writing onto the page or the screen, to recognize where you have made the easy reach. This is key. It's like, is that actually what I want to say? Have I followed through, as Laura Vanderberg says, on the promise of my imagination? Am I done with this? It's all about revision. But if we're going to talk about poetry in terms of prose, and we're looking at things like this, one of the things, now occasionally we are going to use an abstraction. We are going to want to talk about actual happiness or disaster or something very, very, very specifically abstract, if I may say that. But here's the thing about scene writing and prose and other things where the poetics of your writing can carry your meaning just by setting a mood or by creating a certain tone. So if you were going to write something about, if you wanted to have in your scene this sense of trust, this sense of safety, that you don't want to say Joan trusted her environment, because who wants to say that? But you want to have the scene be holding all these things, then you may have an environment in which, you know, somebody smiles over at the person in the passenger seat and they enter the house and there's the smell of rising dough and there's a dog snoring in the bed in the corner. And somebody offers you a cup of coffee with almond milk because you're lactose intolerant. You don't even say because you're lactose intolerant. Somebody's drinking almond milk. They got a reason to be drinking almond. Somebody knew they were drinking almond. This idea of safety and trust just woven into the prose in ways where you can have your reader not even know that that's how they got there. But there they are in the safe place before, you know, the bloody knife comes out or the hitch comes or whatever else we're doing while we're writing. And this idea, you know, frequently we'll talk about the difference between fiction and nonfiction at the moment, and it relates to our part 3 of this, in which we're going to write a little scene, a little picture. So the idea of memory. So June, back to June Jordan, when she's talking about, is it a poem? Which is a great question, because sometimes the answer is, if you call it a poem, it's a poem. And then other people will be very upset at that notion. There are rules and things to follow, and it's not a poem for them unless it follows certain tenets. But let's just, it doesn't, and I don't even want to use it here. Is it writing with integrity? So she would say, A, is it a medium for telling the truth? And I would argue that even if you're writing fiction, you are trying to tell the truth. You know, there's that saying that said fiction is the lie that tells us who we really are. Memory is a lie, often. Or it is this amorphous thing that we reach back for bad. And that is a fantastic thing for writing. Because in the fact that it changes, it already sets you up for this reach for the truth. So is all writing a medium for telling the truth? Well, most of the writing I want to read is, I will say if I want to read it, it's trying to get at and talk about an abstraction, truth, talk about your abstraction. Maybe the biggest one there is. Is it the achievement of maximum impact with minimal number of words? So the thing about concision is it doesn't mean short. Concision can be epic. Concision can be the 6,000 word sentence. Concision doesn't mean short. It means everything there is absolutely necessary. Every word, every piece of punctuation is absolutely necessary. That's what concision is. And all writing benefits from that. Does it take the utmost precision in the use of language, hence density and intensity of expression? So here's where you as an individual author come back into play. The intensity and density of expression comes from the intensity and density of your intention. Know what you're trying to get at. Even if you can't answer that question for yourself, because it is going to lead you to these surprising metaphors that may read a little wonky, but then somehow feel perfect. And the reader doesn't have to know the inside of your mind or the inside of your heart. They just gotta be along for the ride on the page. And they won't. So the third part here is either write a picture or a scene from memory. And memory has the great benefit of providing you with some of these concrete nouns. If you felt a certain way in your memory, there'll be a picture in your head that has some correlating images. Or make something up. Write a piece of fiction that uses your abstraction. This time we are going to pay more attention to the verbs. So instead of, and you're not going to use your abstraction at all. So you're not going to say, trust is your damp palm in mine. But this scene will definitely have a damp palm in another. So we're going to take about 7 minutes to do that work. Any questions on what the agenda is?
Using the words we've already done.
Using the words you've already done, but this time you're going to be thinking about more dynamic verbs. You're going to be creating a seed that is trying to communicate this big idea. And it doesn't necessarily have to have plot. I mean, you're welcome to thought away. But this can also just be a snapshot. give it another minute. Time for the fun part. Who wants to go? Eye contact. Can only go by eye contact. Or the avoidance of Jake, you gonna read?
Well, I'm not sure I'm on the right page, but the only way I'm gonna find out is to expose myself. So. As I fell, the lights went out in my head. The sound got louder and louder, though it was nothing.
What do we suppose Jake's abstracting? Would you read it again? That's very short.
As I fell, the lights went out in my head. But then the sound got louder and louder until there was nothing.
Anybody want to have it again? There's a podcast. Well, unconsciousness might be a part of that too. What was it?
Well, I was thinking of fading out, unconscious, I guess.
Yeah, well, and the idea that you not only have, the visual aspect of that, but there's something going on in the ears. Exactly. And I think, we experience things, you can't avoid it. We experience the things through the body. It's going to go through the body before the brain has anything to do with it.
What it reminds me of is when I had blood drawn before they realized that I didn't lay down, I was and that's what kind of happened. It's like blood in your head, and then but you can hear like this roaring in your ears. And you sort of passed out, but you hit the floor at the same time. So it reminds me of that.
Yeah, and I think, if we were to think back on that, certainly because you experienced it, that ringing in the ears or the hearing, certainly the thump of the floor might weigh in, but very underutilized in prose is hearing, oddly enough, and smell, very underutilized.
And I remember the smell of it. I was at the hospital lab when it happened, and they put me in the chair and, oh, you'll be fine. And the next thing I know, I hit my head on the chair. And it was like a train wreck. I was pregnant. So I was even more like.
Got pregnant while it was happening, or?
That's another story.
Sorry.
That's fiction.
Well, they were doing that test that they do it 6 months whenever they make you drink that it's really terrible and stuff, and then take blood, and you have to go on empty stomach, and I'm pregnant, so I don't know, it just seemed like a whole cocktail was
That's a good way to put the whole cocktail. That was the whole cocktail.
disaster.
Is that what you wrote about? Is that what you wrote about?
No, I actually wrote about it.
All right, well, you've given it away, but can we hear it?
Oh, sure, sorry. Well, it's not very long. It's like tunnel vision closes in on me, and my mind sees the red orange flames engulfing his image, and smoke, non-existent smoke, smelled like a campfire in a sulfur pit.
That sounds angry. Sulfur is a good, I frequently think of sulfur and anger together.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, soaking
Well,
tanks are
I don't know if
very
it's
useful.
the brimstone thing.
Right, it's the brimstone.
Kind of like that, the hell in the fire and brimstone, but yeah, there's only been a few times I've been really angry, and that kind of reminds me, like, Like it started on fire with my eyeballs, I probably.
Yeah, I mean, that whole transformational, I mean, the health is a medical. Who else?
In the living room floor, iPad in hand, my child smiles up at me, breaking his continuous stares as he figures out his game. A faint smell of poop lingers downstairs, making its way to my nose. I know he had a poopy mess hours ago. Why have I not ran a load yet? I ask myself. Fighting the guilt and the tiredness, I attempt to stay present, mindfulness leading my awareness into my hands and subsequently to the rest of my body. I breathe, knowing there are vegetables to be prepared for dinner. Tonight, broccoli. Suddenly, my son wails in horror of having lost every level. The car crashed again. To his yells, I respond with silence, knowing that this too shall pass.
The high drama of being at home. Huh? Yeah, just to mention even the word broccoli. Broccoli is such a, I mean, it's a vegetable that I'm very fond of actually, but just the sound of it sounds just so homey. Broccoli. Who else? Oh, what was your abstraction?
Mature.
Oh.
Oh, we should have guessed that one. Nobody would have gotten it, I'm sure, but I would have liked to, and not because of the writing, it's just that, because that's many layered, right? Many tentacles. It's acceptance, it's awareness, doesn't preclude frustration. Yeah, it's a complicated one. Thank you for doing it. Well,
That's okay.
I always go for myself.
Right.
I'm not sure I can follow.
just give us what you got.
Well, early morning, wake up as usual. Spring, rainy day in bed. Fresh smile, fresh smell, evokes osmanthus flower. Blooming in the humble as a child. Dry throat, swallowing forgotten childhood, rice cake. Complex sweet, sticky rice. Elixir played Celine Dion, favorite song. Almost forgotten friend of childhood call. Serendipity, joyful.
Almost a high bloom, huh? Almost that high bloom form, this beautiful
Yes.
kind of prose piece, and then that lovely reflection at the end. Yeah, yeah, I love it. And you know, what a beautiful meandering too, from the sticky rice to, well, from the blossom to the sticky rice to Celine Dion, back to the phone call. Yeah, it's a beautiful journey and a quiet one as well. Joyful. Yeah. Joyful. You have time for another? Yes.
The day was way too long. The endless lines of beaten down humanity searching for nourishment. If only in the worn out eyes of comments. Then it happened, as if on cue, the incessant wailing wall, terror, blasting the eardrums, warning the heart that danger was lurking. Even the damn endless lines began to duck and hide from impending doom. Perhaps if the days were only shorter, the scent of spring instead of winter laughter. Hope may have prevailed.
Thank you. Everything just. Right, everything was.
It's funny because I had everything put, but unfortunately it didn't.
Oh, yeah. I've been thinking a lot of Anna Akhmatova this week, and she wrote that beautiful poem Requiem, which is quite long. But it has that scene in the beginning that a lot of people are familiar with, and then she's standing in 1757, and she's standing outside a prison in Leningrad with a lot of other families waiting to find out about the fates of their relatives. And there's a woman who approaches her and says, approached her without knowing that she's a famous Russian poet, because nobody was famous in that moment. And, the woman just simply said, can you describe this? And Anna Ahmed said, yes, I can. And then she goes into the long poem about the kind of darkness that you're talking about. Yeah. I really, really enjoyed that if only there were a scent of spring. That sort of tease of knowing what something else is. That's the polarity. That's the tension. It's introducing the possibility of the scent of spring when everything else is so heavy and thick and humid and cold and hard. You get this one little bulb of a plant poking up in the middle of the piece. That's tension. That's what gives you peace of life and life. Just want to right away. Yeah. Well, yes. It is the proverbial time for questions. I do have another poem I was going to talk about, narrative structure. Do you want to ask questions? Do you want to talk about narrative structure? Both. We go through it. Well, the other thing is this has a caveat, because even though this is one of my favorite narrative poems, I am not a particular narrative poet myself, but I love Jill McDonough. It does have liberal use of the F word, and I'm not talking about feelings. I'm talking about that other F word. So, will not be your cup of tea if you are sensitive to that language. But are we game? Okay. It's a narrative arc, but I also need something. If anybody here has a Boston accent, they can read this, otherwise not. This is what you have to imagine a Bostonian accent. Accident Mass Ave by Jill McDonough. I stopped at a red light on Mass Ave in Boston, a couple of blocks away from the bridge, and a woman in a beat-up old Buick backed into me. Like, cranked her wheel, rammed right into my side. I drove a Chevy pickup truck. It being Boston, I got out of the car yelling, swearing at this woman, a little woman whose first language was not English, but she lived and drove in Boston too, so she knew. We both knew. The thing to do is get out of the car, slam the door as hard as you fucking can, and yell things like, what the fuck were you thinking, you fucking blind? What the fuck is going on? Jesus Christ. So we swore at each other with perfect posture, unnaturally angled chins. I threw my arms around, sudden jerking motions with my whole arms, the backs of my hands toward where she hit my truck. But she hadn't hit my truck. She hit the tire. No damage done. Her car was fine too. We saw this while we were yelling. And then we were stuck. The next line in our little drama should have been, look at this fucking down, I'm not paying for this shit, I'll call the cops lady. Maybe we throw in, and you're in big trouble, sister, or I just hope for your sake there's nothing wrong with my fucking suspension. That sort of thing. There was no fucking thing. There was nothing else for us to do, so I stopped yelling. And she looked at the tire she backed into, her little eyebrows pursed and worried. She was clearly in the wrong. I was enormous. And I've been acting as if I'd like to hit her. So I said, well, there's nothing wrong with my car, nothing wrong with your car. Are you okay? She nodded. She started to cry. So I put my arms around her and I held her. Middle of the street, Mass Ave, Boston, a couple of blocks from the bridge. I hugged her and I said, we were scared, weren't we? And she nodded, and we laughed. Why is that a poem? And we'll talk about why I split it up the way I did. Why are we calling it a poem?
Snapshot, it's kind of a slice of life. Not going into great detail about everything else around them, just that in 5 minutes in the moment.
Yeah, so it's a combination of the achievement of maximum impact with minimal number of words and precision in use of language, intensity of expression, it's those things. You know, one of the things, one of the reasons it's a poem is because she didn't have to, she could have written this as a prose piece and still called it a poem, but she mitigated it. She broke lines. So it is one stanza when you read it all out together, but she specifically has the lines end in certain places. And there are places where that matters. There are places where it matters less, and there are places where it matters more. But the thing I really want to talk about this as a narrative poem is the use of repetition to allow the reader to understand that something has irrevocably changed. That we have passed the point of no return, which is another expression for climax. We have passed the point where things can be the same again. And the bolding in this is my bolding. It is not bolded in the form of the poem. But if we go back to the front, I stopped at a light on Mass Avenue in Boston, a couple of blocks from the bridge. And we are given our setting. And in this setting, everybody involved in this poem knows where that is. And everybody knows how to drive. And everybody knows how to get mad when people aren't driving well. We are located, especially Boston. And then, of course, we have these little bits, like crank the wheel right into us. We have these fragments. So we have this short temper, we have this split vision, but it's that Mass Avenue, a couple of blocks from the bridge, that I really want to talk about, because are we in the same place? We're standing on the same ground, but we are in a new place.
Emotional.
Things are different without us having budged from anywhere. And the prose, I mean, this is as close as you get to just a prose piece in poetry. It's extremely narrative. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But it is this technique of sliding that in with the same syntax, in the same form, so that we can actually be surprised at the repetition. And repetition is always about coming back to the same thing and having it be slightly different. If the repetition, even in anaphora, when you say and, every and is different. If it's doing the work. So in this time, middle of the street, Mass Avenue, Boston, a couple of blocks from the bridge, is a new place and a new day because of what has transpired. But it's a place marker for us to actually remember where we started. So when you repeat like that, you can't help but remember the prior repetition or the prior example of the thing. And you might use, like in Harjo's poem, you might come back to the table again and again and again. I mean, it's almost a cliche, right? Put a bird on it. The idea of there's always going to be something. Some people write their whole lives about the forest, or they write about rivers, or they write about the ocean. And it just takes this different shape and this different form. But this idea that we can see things with fresh eyes by coming back to it exactly as it is, if we have done the work around it, to be in this different place, even though the language and the syntax is exactly the same. Plus, that's just a cool poem. It always makes me cry a little bit. All right, now we have 5 minutes for questions. Anybody got one?
Irene,
Michael?
you're gonna do a workshop this Saturday, right?
Oh, I am indeed.
And there are some spaces left in that workshop. What are you gonna do on that workshop on Saturday?
Well, I am going to be talking specifically about vision tools through a lens of poetic technique, but for me, it all kind of bundles up into one. Get that. I am very interested, particularly in generative revision, which any editor I've ever worked with is not happy to hear, because that means I'm willing to change things as the ink is being splashed onto the page. But part of the reason to think of revision in terms of generative revision for me is not only because multiple projects can come from the same compelling idea. You know, Gregory Orr is famous for saying he wrote about the same, you may not recognize it, but he wrote about the same thing his entire career. So the idea of generative vision about reforming the idea, but also staying interested. Some of y'all are working on long projects or things that you come back to again and again. It can be difficult to maintain momentum. And some of these techniques are techniques that just reinvigorate interest in the material. Because you can stare at something for so long that it sort of just starts to fade. So the idea about creating momentum and energy in vision. And yeah, I mean, I have genuine enthusiasm for it. I really, really like to go back to this. So of course it's easier with a poem, they're shorter. But even prose, there are good questions to ask, even when you're in your third, fourth, or fifth draft. And that's the same thing we're going to be talking about, Michael.
Is your PowerPoint presentation, is that going to be available online?
It is already.
Thank you.
So if you go to the Central Oregon Writers Guild website and look at the where this presentation is listed, it says Irene's slides at the bottom of it. And then when this recording is available, I'll put the recording down lower and then I'll connect the slides to that. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you all for sharing. Yes, sir?
Very short. Probably not short.
That's a lovely question. I like that question. I don't know that I've ever answered it plainly. I did write poems as a child. My very first publication was in the second grade. I had an entire page of short poems in my elementary school journal. And then I probably wrote some imitations of Edna St. Vincent Millay when I was in high school. And then I didn't write poetry for years and years and years. I always wrote, but I did not write poetry. And then I entered an MFA program where the director just said, I'm going to put you in the poetry cohort. I was like, all right, as long as I'm here. And we were 7 of us, and 4 of us were fiction writers, and 2 of us were poets. So there wasn't, you know, I needed to pick a side of the fence, and my director picked it for me. But it absolutely reawakened something that I didn't know I'd lost. And I will say there are a lot of ways to read a lot of poetry, and you don't have to go to an MFA. But the fact that in 2 years I had a reading list, well, I still have a never-ending reading list, but the exposure to so many translations and generations of poets, and just it became so visceral and meaty rather than academic that there was just no going anywhere else. If that answers your question. All right, y'all, there are cookies and stuff.
Irene and I met at culinary school in San Francisco, and after we moved in together, she would read me little poems on the kitchen table.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did I do that?
Somebody did. Mary, did we get enough signups for?
We have enough signups.
Great.
Yay.
Okay, so that event is 5:30. And Monday, December 9th, right?
And
Yeah,
I will send out something to everybody,
okay, cool.
as long as I can read your email.
All right, thank you, Irene. And as I said, Irene has books available for sale on the back table there. And there is food and snacks, and talk to each other and enjoy. And thank you all for coming, and thank you at home, those of you who came. And those of you at home, eat your own snacks, I guess, and talk to each other. All right, thanks, and we'll see you. Again, there are a few spots left for Irene's workshop on this coming Saturday. It's 1 to 4 in this room. And otherwise, we'll see you on Monday, November 9th or December 9th. for our pop-up. Okay, all right, thank you.
Or the fifth at the anthology.
Oh, or the 5th at the anthology reading, right?